Hi everyone, this is Amanda. Welcome to my channel. Recently, most of the consulting firms in the US started the recruiting cycle for PhD students. Many people have reached out to me to ask about consulting application and my career path from PhD to consulting to business development. Late last year, I was invited by a friend to give a talk at a consulting club about my career path, so I thought it might be helpful to share this recording with more people. There are two parts in this webinar. The first part is a presentation where I cover 4 topics. I prepared this section based on the question list from the consulting club, and then that includes my career trajectory, my transition from academia to consulting, my work and life as a consultant, and my transition from consulting to my current role. The second part is the Q&A section. So first of all, I'd like to introduce my career trajectory and my motivation behind. That's like a typical interview question I got asked a million times, but I think it's a really helpful conversation for you to really understand why I made those choices. And it may be different from what you imagine or you assume. I got my bachelor degree in chemistry in China, and then after that I moved to US and did my PhD in chemistry. At the time I was doing my undergrad, I found myself really talented in doing experiments. So I get a lot of great feedback because I'm always the first one to finish all the experiment in the lab. And then I also did some research in the lab as an undergrad. And then I think I'm pretty good at this. And then I really enjoy doing research in the lab. I'm really curious. I wanted to know why about a lot of things. So that's why I decided to do a PhD. My research was mainly about nanomaterial and their application in drug delivery and MR contrast enhancement. So that's a little bit both of chemistry, like synthetic and material chemistry, and the biology side and the medical side. In the summertime, I got an internship at the Technology Transfer Office. That was because one of my PhD projects was selected for a university GEP fund. This GEP fund was meant to support the translational research and to fill the gap between the NIH fund and the venture capital fund. This fund was managed by the University Technology Transfer Office, so I worked closely with them. The lady I work with actually opened a summer internship program that year, and I really like her. I enjoy working with her, so I applied to the internship program and got selected. So that's why I end up with this internship. My job was to help the professors and projects selected in the GEP fund to prepare the pitch deck so that they can pitch to the external investors. Because the GEP fund can support you for like 2 to 3 years, and after that you have to seek other fundings. During this time, of course, I still get to read literature, understand the technology, and have a lot of meeting with the faculty, of course. But also I can see the technology from a different angle. I will do like market sizing, competitive landscape analysis, some really basic market research. So that's not like what I did in consulting. Of course, it's not that level of detail, but then it's an exercise for me to understand in a high level, how does the industry work and how people will evaluate technology in the business background, in the business context. Found that was interesting. That was pretty different from what I did every day in the lab. So I thought, well, that's something I could consider in the future for the full-time position. But then I realized to land on this kind of position, people usually have at least 2 years experience in the consulting industry or pharma, biotech, medtech, those like industry experience. So I was considering consulting at that time. And also the lady recruited me to this internship program. She also had 2 years experience in consulting, and she encouraged me to apply for consulting. So that's how I planted this seed to look for the career in the consulting. I was about to graduate in 2020 and I was looking for a job. And then we know what happened in 2020, the pandemic hit, and then I got locked down in my apartment and then no access to lab for a while. And I was really anxious because I don't know if I can graduate on time or not. And then the job market was really weird at the time because there were a lot of hiring freeze, kind of like what we see right now. So there's a ton of uncertainty. So everybody was anxious. So at that time, one of my friends reached out that he wanted to practice case interview. I was like, okay, sounds like fun because I know for consulting interview, you have to practice for case interview. So I was like, okay, that's one more option for me. So I just started a live case practice. And then I was super lucky. I got to know, I think 4 to 5 really brilliant case partner. They were super patient with me. And when I first started practicing, I know nothing about case interview, but they were really patient. They coached me a lot so that I learned really quickly from them. And then throughout the whole application process of the consulting firm, we support each other from end to end. Other than case interview, we also help each other prepare for the behavioral interview. And we also help each other with resume and then share information and like interview experience, etc. So I really enjoy my experience then. And after all that effort, I was lucky to get a job offer from one of the top 3 consulting firms. I don't think I can say no to that offer, except especially I don't know if I'm ever gonna get other offer from the industry as a researcher. So I just took that. So as you can tell, I didn't plan to join consulting firms from year 1 of my PhD program. It was more like a random opportunity, like pandemic, everything mixed up. But anyway, that's how I end up in the consulting firm. During my 2 years at consulting firm, I usually do strategy project in the life science space. Also did some project in like chemical space because I have a chemistry degree. And then also did some like operation or like workforce study for like healthcare provider. So that's basically the hospital and medical center. After 2 years busy consultant life, which I will elaborate more later, I thought it was a good time to move, so I landed on my current position. Now I'm working as a business development manager or BD manager at a local university under the School of Medicine. That can help bridge the industry and academia and then to facilitate partnership. So that's about my journey or motivation behind my career trajectory. Then in the next section, I'm going to talk more about transition from academia to consulting. So I'm going to elaborate in 4 questions here. So first is the transferable skills from academia to consulting. I think there's definitely a lot of transferable skill from your PhD. You probably don't realize that. For example, as a PhD student, you can actually absorb and process large amount of information quickly. It could be you reading a literature, not one literature, but like ton of them in like 2 or 3 days, and you really get to know the detail and you synthesize and summary them so that they can help your research. It could also be you process a large amount of data and then to dig insight from them. So this is actually very transferable in the consulting world because as a consultant, especially at associate level, you're just gonna process a lot of information from different sources, and then it requires you to have this sense to know where to proceed. And then also you have the courage to process those a lot of information at the same time, because a lot of people are just overwhelmed and they don't know what to do and they just do nothing. So I saw that happen before. So as a PhD student, we never have this issue. And then the second one is, I will say, most of the PhD I know are very self-driven problem solver, because based on my experience, I have my own project in the lab, and then most of the time I have to figure out a way to move forward by myself. Of course, my PI will be there to help me, and then their lab mate, I can ask questions, but I own the project end to end. Nobody gonna do anything for me. So I have to proactively think about how to problem solve. And then if there anything goes wrong, I will actively thinking, what are the methods that I can go around with it? So after 5 years in the lab, we are pretty naturally become a self-driven problem solver. And then also, I think PhD students are usually really strong in the analytical skill and sense. So I'm not saying that we're doing Excel modeling, like financial modeling in our PhD. Actually, nobody ever do that in the PhD program. But then because we have processed a lot of data, a lot of information, and we do logic thinking and stuff, we actually have that sense. So after you actually grab the skill, like you know how to use the software, how to use the formula, and then like I know many of you actually do programming. So those are really transferable, and you can pick up all the analytical skill in the consulting really, really quickly. Because once you get to know the software, you'll know what's the next step, and then you have the sense of which direction you can move forward, which direction could lead to nowhere. So yeah, it's kind of like business acumen. You can't really define it, or you can't really tell what it is. But then after years and years of practice in one area, you just get that sense. You get that instinct to know where to move forward. So with that being said, I think there are a lot of skills that are transferable from PhD to consulting. But then the other note I wanted to make is if we look at direct transferable skill, which means you don't need extra coaching or learning curve on, then I think MBA candidates are usually stronger. For a lot of the knowledge, MBA students learn more in their MBA program because, of course, they know corporate finance and stuff. So that's something we need to catch up when we go to consulting. So that comes to the second question, the skills I wish I've learned before joining the firm. So first of all, the Excel modeling. So we have a good sense of the Excel modeling, but we usually don't know like the layout, the format, the formula, and then how the structure of people building the Excel model, because it's a collaborative work. And then you have to share your model with all of your team member and sometimes to the client. So you have to make sure everybody know your calculation, data processing steps. So the way Excel model work at consulting firm is that they have to be super flexible. And then everyone can understand your model without you talking over or walk them over the model. So this could be a little bit different on the data processing we have in the PhD, because most of the time people won't stare at your calculation process. You just need to know the final data. That's a little bit different. So that's definitely gonna have some learning curve. But then once you know the basic, you have all the analytical sense, and you're gonna be great at analytical skill. And then the second thing is something I mentioned earlier, the corporate finance. Because most of the project at the firm, especially the strategy project, have a lot of corporate finance component to it. There's a lot of concept, there's a lot of terms, and then there's also a lot of ways that you can do calculation in different ways. So those are the things I wish I've known. Of course, it's still hard to learn everything, but then if you get a consulting offer, you can go over the basic concept of corporate finance so that you can save yourself a little bit more when you join a firm. And then the other one would be the corporate function and then the work structure. So before I joined the firm, I have no idea of how different function or different department in a company works. I know there are going to be like supply chain, there's going to be R&D, there's commercial, but what exactly people do at each department or function, I have no idea about them. After I joined the firm, I had to spend quite a lot of time to catch up on that knowledge and try to understand how people work. A lot of the MBA students, they have experience in industry, so they know it very well. So that's something I wish I've learned before I joined the firm. With that being said, of course, they're going to be learning curve. You have to learn a lot of new things. So there's definitely some challenges I faced during that transition. So of course, first of all, is to pick up all the skill set. One thing I think the firm can do better is the training, because they don't train you how to do a really good Excel model when you first join. You have to learn on the job, but there's no extra time for you to learn. So you have to sacrifice the time you sleep, you eat, your workout, or whatever time. So just gonna have a hard lifestyle for the new joiner. So by the time I was trying to pick up all my Excel skill set, I have to constantly work past midnight, like sign up at 12. Sometimes wake up really early, like wake up at 5 or 6 to start working, because I just need some extra time to pick up those skill set. And then I still need to deliver as everybody else on the team. And also I found it challenging to speak the business language. On the one hand, I'm not a native English speaker, so that makes it even more difficult. On the other side, I talk to a lot of friends like native to here, but then they also have this challenge. So the consulting firm have their own jargon, and then they specifically and intentionally wanted to make those words sound vague because there's a lot of risk associated to them. So you're gonna hear a lot of really vague terms when people give you feedback or people give you direction to work. So it's really hard to understand them to start with. So it just takes time for you to actually learn about what it means and what it really means between the line. So I think that's something I had a little bit struggle with to start with. So that's about the challenge I faced during the transition. Also, I got asked a lot about balancing time between lab research and consulting job preparation. But then I think my case was special. Just like I mentioned, I prepare all the case interview during the pandemic when I don't need to do a lot of lab work. So that's pretty special. I think for right now, people have to do typical workload in the lab and then they still have to prepare for case interview. It's definitely not an easy thing to do at the same time. So I would recommend prioritize your PhD research because getting your PhD degree is always a priority. You can leverage time at weekend or at night so that your PI doesn't need to know about it because my PI was not happy about me preparing the case interview. Okay, so that's about my transition from academia to consulting. So for the sake of time, I'm just gonna move to the next section. So I'm gonna more on my work and life as a consultant. Yeah, at the high level, I think the work and life at consulting is really different from the recruiting session you're gonna hear. I was sitting in that recruiting info session before I joined. And then after I joined, I found those are really different from what I heard before. So today I wanted to tell you more about what's gonna be the real life as a consultant. We can start with your work environment, workload, and stress. First thing is the hour. So during the recruiting session, I heard the typical workload is 9 to 9. So that's like a 10-hour work for every day. And then that's 5 days a week. So it's like 50-hour a week, but that never happened. So a typical client study, I work 70-hour a week on average. In my first year, my weekend was protected very well. So that's 70-hour was spread out in 5 days. So it's typical I start at 8 a.m. and work until midnight or 11 p.m. And then in between, it's really hard to find time to have lunch because sometimes you just have back-to-back meeting. You have meeting for the whole day, and then you only get time to work at night. So of course, during the whole day, you have all the meetings, and then sometimes it's internal meeting so that you can eat while you're having the meeting. But then if it's a client meeting, of course, you can't eat while you're talking to a client. So it's really hard to find time to eat lunch. So I had a really difficult time to manage that because that's really important to me. That's really important to my physical and mental health. So I'm always the one on the team to remind everyone to order lunch, to eat lunch. So yeah, that's some little extra work for me, but I think it's worth it. And then for the dinner, we usually eat dinner after checkout. The checkout could be 5 p.m., it could be 7 p.m., or it could be 9 p.m. So the dinner time is not regular as well. A lot of people just eat one meal for the day, which is the dinner, and they eat at 10 p.m. and that's it for the whole day. And then during the day, they can have energy bar or snacks or coffee, and they never drink water, they only drink coffee. I don't think that's healthy for me, at least. So I found it's really challenging to maintain a good lifestyle. I also hear the same thing for a lot of other firms. So I assume it's pretty typical in the consulting world in general. I do want to say it's different across different industry. I think for life science, in most of the firm, it's really, really demanding. It's probably the top 3 demanding industry. Consumer can also be very intense. Tech can be challenging because so many people want to work in tech, like they want to serve all the big tech companies. So it can be competition there, but then the client themselves are pretty chill. So it depends. And of course, there are people working like energy space or like traditional manufacturing industry. They usually have a better hour. And then in terms of the work environment, I found a lot of people are really direct. And then I will say they are actually really mean people. Of course, we need to be direct because we don't have time for all the small talk and stuff. People are just direct to the point. That's no problem at all. But then sometimes people just play around with that, and then they are just really mean to people because they don't bother to care about other people. That I really don't like. That's a pretty typical work culture across different firms. That's just my observation. And then that's the working culture I really don't like at consulting. And then for the stress level, I think it's definitely really high. I think it's almost like 10 times as the stress level at a PhD. Because in the PhD program, nothing is super urgent. Of course, there are deadlines to the grant, but then the deadline is usually in months or in days so that you can plan ahead. But then in consulting, the deadline comes in every minute. If you are 1 minute late, you're gonna be blamed a lot because the whole team are delayed, and then everyone gonna blame on you. And then on the other hand, the deadline is really short, but then there can be things goes wrong. For example, the data format is not right, or the client just don't give you the data, but then you still have to do this presentation to the circle like next week. So there could be everything can goes wrong, but then your deadline never change. So you just need to be very flexible and then find a way to go around or just have plan B all the time so that you can deliver on time. So that deliverable stress is all the time, and then there's no easier way to navigate that. I think people have this stress on everyone on purpose so we can work a long hour and work more efficiently. But I personally don't really like this kind of working environment because people can't be really creative in this environment. People just like AI or robot at the end of the day. So I don't really enjoy that. So that's about some working environment, workload, and stress. Of course, there are some like good side of the consulting world. Like you're gonna learn a lot, but then that's the cost of all the experience and skill set you can get from consulting. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is the travel because that's essential in MBB. I know for a lot of the boutique firm or life science firm, they don't require that many travel, but then at MBB, you do have to travel a lot. For me, I think in 2022, I traveled more than 100 nights for sure. That I think there should be far more than that. The longest travel I had was 3 weeks in a row. So by the time I get home, I can't find a lot of things in my apartment because I just forget about them. The travel life is not that easy because a lot of people think we just fly in the first class or just stay in a really fancy hotel. But then at the meantime, you just need to work all the way there. You have to work in the Uber, you have to work in the airport, you have to work all the way on the plane. And then when the plane is taxiing, there's Wi-Fi available. So you're just gonna get to work with your colleague nonstop until the flight lands. And then also for the hotel part, yeah, we stay at fancy hotels, but then you just spend like that many hours in the hotel every day and you just have to work all the time. So I just gave up on the fancy hotel. I just picked the one that's closest to the client side because I just want 5 more minutes sleep in the morning. And also I would solve for comfortable working environment in the hotel because a lot of the fancy hotel, they don't have comfortable chair and desk in the room. One time that was funny that I stayed in a pretty good hotel, but then their chair wasn't really comfortable. It was more like a bar style than just like comfortable working style. So I was asking the front desk if you can send me a more comfortable chair. And then front desk was saying, well, our hotel is for people on vacation, not for people on work trip. I was like, okay, I'm really offended, but then sadly, that's the truth. So my point being, although we fly in first class in fancy hotel, but there are not many times that you can actually enjoy that because you just need to work and deliver all the time. It may not be that a good travel life as you may think, but at the end of the day, I got all the bonus point, all the mileage. So that's still pretty good. I'm just gonna move on to the next question. The value of advanced degree in the consulting world. So that's another tricky question. Because in my consulting experience, I think the most valuable thing for advanced degree holder are actually their degree. For example, I have a PhD degree that's really valuable to the firm because a lot of the client we work with in the pharma, everyone there have a PhD degree. So you have to have some PhD on your team on the consulting side to serve your client. But then in terms of the skill set from the PhD, just like the next question said, I don't think any project in my consulting life ever used my PhD knowledge. Of course, I did my PhD in chemistry, and then most of the project I work on was in life science. So of course, there aren't that many knowledge get leveraged. But also, I asked colleagues who had PhD in biology, but then they all said there's no chance for them to use the PhD level knowledge. I think the bachelor degree in a science major is usually sufficient. But also there's nuance here because for MBB, we usually do management consulting. So that's more on like strategy or corporate management side. So there aren't that many specific knowledge that we need to know. But then in some boutique firm, especially in some life science firm, you have to have those background knowledge to help you navigate all the project. So that's a nuance here. So I think for PhD degree holder, if you go to like LDK or Clearview, they will appreciate your degree more than going to MBB. The next question is how to manage stress and maintain work-life balance. Okay, it goes back to the stress part. To manage my stress level, a good way is after you have a lot of reps, you have experience, you know what kind of thing can go wrong. So you just always have plan B to prepare yourself. When things do get wrong, you can use your plan B immediately. And also because you have a plan B in mind, you just have less anxiety to start with. So that's beneficial for your mental health as well. To manage work-life balance, I don't think that's manageable in consulting. It's basically just work, or work is your life. Or if you interpret life as stay alive, then that's something you're gonna work for. Because it just takes so much effort to eat on time or eat 3 meals a day. That's like our goal for every project. We have to work really hard to make sure we eat. And then sleep more than 6 hours a day is really luxury for all the consultants. For so many projects, I only sleep like 4 hours, 5 hours a night. And then that will be pretty common for strategy and due diligence project. So I will say if you decided to go to consulting for like a couple of years, you just have to be prepared that you have zero personal life. So in my first year, the weekend get protected very well, but then when you take on more responsibility and you start to step up to transitioning to engagement manager, and then you take more responsibility, so you get email and text and calls on the weekend. And sometimes I also need to work for like 3 to 4 hours on the weekend. And of course, working on Sunday night is like default because we need to fly in anyway. And then on the flight and on the trip there, we usually just work and set up the next week for success. So there are some weekend work. And then even though there's no weekend work, you're basically exhausted by the end of the week. And then it's really difficult for you to plan anything really fun on the weekend. I feel so exhausted and I usually just sleep during the whole weekend. And then by the time I'm awake, I'm just doing like random stuff. I can't really think and I can't do any creative work. I used to play piano a lot, but then I feel like it's too much work to move my finger because I just don't have any extra energy for that. And of course, I lose contact with most of my friends because I'm so busy and it's really unpredictable for my strict schedule. For example, if I schedule a call on a Sunday afternoon, then I may need to cancel because there's going to be some working call email for me. So I need to jump back to my laptop. So there's just no predictable schedule. So it makes it really difficult for your social network. So I basically just disappeared in my friend's network for 2 years. And then after I switched up, like all the people start to reach out to catch up with me. So like, where were you in the past 2 years? So that was funny. But anyway, really challenging to maintain work-life balance. Okay, so I'm just gonna move to the last part on my current role. So first question is why I exit from consulting to my current role. I think I made it really clear in the previous section that I don't really like the working environment because I don't like working 80, 90 hours a week, and I don't like travel all the time. So that's why I wanted to leave consulting in 2 years. And also, I think it's pretty well known that most of the people are going to exit in 2 years. So at the 2 year mark, people assume you have get all the consulting skill set. So it makes sense for you to leave. If people leave under 1 year, people are going to be like, are you fired or something? So people have those bias. Although I know a lot of brilliant people, they just choose to exit before they hit 1 year mark because they don't like the job and then they have some bad option. But then those are just like stereotype people have about this role. So my current role, basically BD role. So my main responsibility is to help the faculty and then the medical school to build strategic partnership with the industry. It could be some small things. For example, it could be a joint grant application. It could be the industry has some RFP, request for proposal, and then they can share some funding opportunity. And we can help the faculty to navigate those kind of opportunity. And then it can also be some higher level strategic partnerships. For example, the university can have incubator collaborating with the industry, or the university and industry can have joint venture. They can have venture fund to invest on some of the early stage technology. So those are some of the partnership we wanted to build and maintain. My day-to-day work will be have meeting with the faculty so that we understand their research and understand their willingness to work with the industry. And of course, we work with the BD team on the industry side, usually pharma, biotech, and whatever, to understand what's their need, what they're looking for, what technology are they interested in. Then there's going to be some strategy work to prioritize our resource, of course. There are going to be a lot of landscape scan to really understand the industry and the main player for like university and industry and stuff. So I think it's leveraging both my PhD background and my consulting skill set. Because on the PhD side, you're still going to read literature and really understand the detail in the faculty's research. And then you're also going to use a lot of analytical skill from consulting, like doing the strategy plan and do a lot of market analysis. So I think that's the job that leveraging both sides of my background. So I think that's an ideal position for me right now. And then some key consulting skill help me with my current role. Like I mentioned, some analytical skill are definitely helpful. Communication skill is also really important because we know how to speak to the industry, because the industry definitely speak a different language than academia. And I know both, so it's easier for me to communicate with both of them. Cool. So I think that's all the question I wanted to address on my slides. So we can move to the Q&A section. First question, on average, how many projects are you expected to juggle at the time? So I assume you're asking about the consulting experience, right? So if that's the case for MBB, you usually just need to work on one project at a time. This kind of project can be really short, can be 2 weeks, or it can be 3 months, it depends, but then you only need to work on one project at a time. But then I know at some boutique firm or life science consulting firm, you have to work on 2 projects at a time. Yeah, so it depends on the company or firm you join. Okay, I want to ask, what soft skill do you suggest PhD students to develop for their transition into the industry? I will say it's definitely the communication skill. But I know it's also really challenging for PhD students to get really polished and reps on that, because most of the time we just work in the lab and it's like working alone or just working with 3 to 5 people. So I think it's not easy to really navigate that. But then one thing I would recommend is every time you do group seminar report, try to do your report in a more organized way, and in a more like a top-down way. That also depends on your PI style. Sometimes the PI will appreciate that, but then sometimes they don't care. If they don't have a strong opinion on that, you can try to exercise on how to make those top-down communication when you do presentations. I think that's going to be helpful. One more soft skill I would say is to organize everything, because at PhD, all my files and documents are so randomly placed in everywhere. And then after consulting, when I look back to my PhD folder, it drove me nuts. That's something you can try to get started to be organized. For example, you can date all the document you have. How you date a document is usually the year, month, and date, and then the title of this document, and the version number can be V1 or V final or V share, and then who's the last editor on that. So mine is TD, or when we pass to another people, they will rename the file with their initial or different version number so that we have a good version control. And then there's definitely going to be a lot of communication on version control. I think I definitely can do better when I edit manuscript with my PhD group, because each collaborator edit their own thing, and then you have to consolidate everything in the end. It's really painful. But then if we can do a better version control, that's also a pretty good exercise. Is it typical for a consultant to transition into roles at client company? I actually never see a case that the consultant go directly to the client they serve. But of course, it is possible that you go to client. I keep hearing the story like, well, if a consultant is like a super rocket star on the team, and then the next day you find out that this person exited into the client company, but that never happened to my tenure. And I've never known any friend of mine at the firm who done the same. I think that's probably because of, as associate, we don't have that many client exposure. So we do have client exposure. We hold client meeting and stuff, but then we usually have meeting to like director level or the level below that, like to like individual contributor level. But then those people are not the one make decision to hire you as a like corporate strategy role. So that's not common at associate level. At engagement manager level, it's like a project leader role. It's not typical, but it happens sometimes. And then when you go higher up, like AP partners, then it's really possible that because they actually get to build a good relationship with the CEO, with the board. Also, they know more about the client's company. They basically know all the financial data, and then they can make their own judgment of if they wanted to join or not. Associate doesn't know that much about a company. So if it's more higher up, it's definitely more possible to exit to the client company. What qualities expectation does the consulting industry look for in PhD? That comes to recruiting question. I think that's harder to say now because I think the bar is changing all the time. So I don't feel comfortable to make a comment on that. I think it's definitely related to the macroeconomic condition. Like in 2021, I think all the consulting firms hire a lot of people because there's just like a ton of client work. But then right now, there's the client work is really, really minimal. So people don't hire that much. In the current market condition, I think the consulting firm will prioritize hire MBA versus PhD. And also they will recruit undergrad because they're more affordable. So that's the general trend. And then when it comes to PhD, of course, if they wanted to expand in certain industry or certain area, they really need some expert in that. They will definitely recruit a PhD. For example, if they wanted to grow the revenue in the AI field, they're definitely going to recruit PhD in like computer science or whatever, machine learning, because they actually know what's going on. But then in some like the traditional field like pharma or energy or tech, I don't think PhD have that strong advantage versus MBA and undergrad.
Thank you so much for all of that. I really appreciated the time that you took to make all the slides and answer the questions. And I appreciate your honesty with all of the answers that you had. So thank you for that. If you were to, knowing the experience that you have now, if you were to go back in time to when you were a graduate student, what advice would you give yourself to transition into consulting in an easier way?
Yeah, of course, I will, of course, pick up some of the hard skill set I mentioned and also set the expectation lower because I was expecting too much. Because I was like, oh, I'm going to log out at 9 p.m. That's manageable. But then I realized it's not. Just set your expectation to work from 8 a.m. to midnight nonstop. And then when you actually join the firm, you might find your life is actually easier. So you're going to be happier, right? So I think that's the key. And also, a lot of people are just really excited by the salary. I totally understand that. So if you just wanted to have a really great paycheck, then just go for it. It's definitely a great choice, because with all the consulting firm, you just suffer in like in a similar way, but then MBB gonna pay much better. And then of course other consulting firm pay better than the industry. So in that sense, there's no regret. And then for the career development perspective, I think if you don't want to do bench work anymore, consulting is a really good option to exit. Because personally, I don't want to do bench work because I work in chemistry lab. There's like all dangerous chemicals there. We have accident all the time. So I don't want to risk my life working in the lab anymore. But of course, I respect all the people who like to work in the lab. If we wanted to leverage our PhD background but do no bench work, there aren't that many options. You can do business development, you can do strategy, and then you can do like product manager, product strategy in like medtech space. But then they all require some exposure to the industry or business knowledge or sense. So in consulting, you can get those sense in a really fast way. Like I get all the exposure in 2 years, and because we work super long hour, that experience is equal to like 3 to 4 years of experience in the industry, and people actually acknowledge that. So I think it's a fast way to get some business sense and experience, so that will help you to land on the next job.
So would you recommend learning business concepts and financial concepts and applications in grad school to make it kind of an easier transition into consulting?
Yeah, if you have time. But then again, prioritize your PhD work, because that's the most important thing. You need to get the degree. But if you have time, sure. I took some class from the MBA program because that was free, and then I got some time. So I just took that. And then of course I do like a lot of readings, and then but then I feel like I should do more. One comment I wanted to make is you probably already know, but the job market in consulting is not good this year. And then I don't think it's going to be much better next year. It could be picking up a little bit, but then I don't think it's going to be back in 2021. The main reason is like macro economy environment. We all know that. And then for consulting specifically, people are not getting that many client projects. So even though you get offer, you intern a firm, you're still going to be struggle a lot to find a client study, because people have to coach you from the very, very beginning. And then the project is understaffed because the partner will sell the project at a lower budget, so that they're going to staff your people. So they don't have the bandwidth to coach new joiners. So you're going to have a hard time sitting on the beach, which means not on client project. And then you're going to be struggle a lot because you are not getting reps, you are not building your skill set. And then by the time you join the firm for half year and you are still not building your skill set, you're going to be in a very interesting position. They can ask you to leave or whatever is not ideal. So if you're interested in consulting, but you're not graduating soon, I think it's still a good career path for you to consider. But then if you are considering getting job application this next year, then just be prepared that it could be challenging, and then just have some plan B, like go to industry or whatever. And then if you already spend a lot of time preparing for a consulting interview, just go for it. People will still hire. It's not like hire zero people. There's still chance, but then just gonna be more challenge. Just FYI, yeah. Any other question?
Okay, I have one.
Okay.
What's the learning curve when you were assigned to an unfamiliar project or the topic you're not heard about or barely learned about in the past? Or let's say how many time is allowed or the firm will give you to actually learn this project?
One day. I will say as a PhD hire, we don't usually get to the project that we have no idea. For example, I have a background in chemistry and a little bit biology, so they won't assign project in like fashion or movie to me, because that's definitely you're gonna have to learn much more. But then, of course, in life science, there are gonna be a lot of new things for you. So I think one good side is the firm have a lot of training program. It's like on your own pace training. It's like a video or something. They make it very high level, but then you can grab the key information you need to know about a certain field. For example, you're going to spend 1 hour to learn about the high level knowledge on immuno-oncology. And then after that, of course, you are not going to learn everything as a PhD student, but then you're going to know the basic. You know how to use the terms, you know the basic concept, you know what are the category under the industry and who are the key players. They have a lot of this really helpful training built. I really appreciate that. Before I acted, I took as many as I can. So that was really helpful. And of course, there's going to be things that's not covered in training and not covered in your prior experience. You're just going to learn that. Can't sign off before midnight and then read all the things before day 2, because they will ask you answer on day 1, on day 2, on the first week. You just have to be prepared. So usually the first 2 weeks are the most challenging ones. Yeah. This is all I wanted to share in this video. Thank you so much for your patience. I know it's a super long video. If you find this content helpful, please put a like and follow me, and then stay tuned for the next video.